Hello guys and welcome to the Tretogor World Tour 2.5. Now the reason that this is 2.5 and not version 3 is because this episode is mostly going to focus on the new stuff in Tretogor. I'm not going to give a complete world tour because I did that back in December. So this is actually a bit of a sequel to my proper version 2.0 world tour. What's new in Tretogor? The world download is now available for free. If you guys want to explore the world at the same time as I do in this video, pause, give it a download, hop into the world, and let's explore together. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and a nice little comment. I spent tons of hours working on this stuff, and I really appreciate you guys' support. Now, the last piece of housekeeping that I want to do before we really get into things is to show you guys the new map. So as we hit up the new locations in Tretogor, I'm going to be showing you where we are on the map with a little red X. And the way I want to do things for this episode is to go in a clockwise direction. So we are actually going to start up north by Medina so that we can see what's new in everyone's favorite desert city. If we follow this little road north here, going through the swamps, you can see that the city itself is mostly the same as it's ever been, plus or minus a couple of minor details. The really new thing for Medina is that we now have boats in the harbor. So this is the big desert city for Tretogor, and I had always imagined it as a place where people liked to go fishing, but I never really had any fishing boats. So recently I came in and made some little Arabian style fishing boats, one here and one over there, just to kind of fill out the water and add a touch of color to this place. If we fly over the great city of Medina and head over into the desert, we can pass by the big old dragon skull and into the area that contains the Temple of Fertility. The Temple of Fertility is mostly the same as it's ever been, like Medina, but here the big addition is that we've added some little white tents for pilgrims and also reworked a little bit of the temple itself. People who have the older world downloads might also notice that we have some new terrain and mountains around here just to make the desert feel a little bit more isolated. But in any case, if we fly over this way, we can get to some of the first new content in Tretogor. And that is, I've been doing a ton of terraforming, and this is the result of the biggest of it. This is Whitehead Bluff, a really big cliff inspired by the cliffs of Dover in England. You can see that they rise about 40 meters above the sea level, and they are really the biggest thing that I've done in Tretogor in terms of terraforming. And we are currently in the northeastern corner of the map. If I fly up a little bit closer, you can see that we are working with a pretty fun little gradient here that goes from this clay to diorite and white concrete into calcite and into smooth quartz. And up top, we transition into these kind of bone blocks and sandstone bits just to make things a little bit warmer around where the grass is. Now, this area is technically complete, but it doesn't really have anything going on, and that's because I have purposely left some parts of Tretogor open for expansion. If we continue skipping down the coast for a little while, we can get to a small little town called New Gedem. And this is a place that kind of is a bit apart from the rest of Tretogor because it's taking very different stylistic inspiration. This place is mostly inspired by playing Pokemon. And I won't linger here for too long because there's nothing really new to show, but this is just a cute little town where I didn't really try to make realistic logical stuff like farms and mines and logging camps and all that stuff. It's just supposed to be a cute little self-contained thing with no real explanation as to how it really survives day to day. The real reason why we are skipping down this way, though, is that I can show you that we have a big new pirate ship. So like with the ships at Medina, one of the big things that I've been doing for the New World download is just including a ton of new boats. And I found that making these new boats is a really fun, interesting challenge. And it's a good way to just spend a couple hours working on something that isn't a whole full-blown build, but still adds a lot of life and color to the world. Or in this case, a lot of dark grays, because this is inspired by the Black Pearl from Pirates of the Caribbean. And we are at Cutthroat Cove on the map. The actual cove itself is mostly unchanged, but for those of you who haven't seen it, if we come into this little cave area, you can see that we have a little bit of a pirate hideout. Leaving the pirate hideout, we are going to take a very brief trip into the middle of the ocean to take a look at one of the weirder contributions to the newest installation of this map, which is the sea serpent. So I like the idea of this world feeling alive, and another one of those challenging things that I've been trying to do is working on organics. So this is a really interesting organic. It is basically a big coiled sort of sea serpent body that goes all the way under water here. It's a mix of things like warped wood blocks and glazed terracotta just for little specks of orange. And then right where it's coming out of the water, you can see it is dripping down and it is going to attack this Viking ship. So we also now finally have Viking ships in Tretogor. This is a pretty simple design, and part of that is because this is an older area. This is the kind of Viking-inspired town of Anchorage. I wanted to kind of stick with that traditional style, but just make things look a little bit more interesting and unique. Taking a little brief trip just to show you guys what Anchorage is. It is this barren, gravelly area that has mostly gravel and small shrubs and stuff, but we also have these turf-roofed homes built out of rough cobbles. And we are currently here on the map. For those of you who have already seen Anchorage before, you might be surprised to see that there is now a big forest here. And yes, one of the other big things that I've been doing apart from terraforming cliffs is trying to create tons of custom forests. So this is Neverwell Forest. Not much actually happens here to earn itself that name, but if we come around here, we can see that there is a little bit of a cool copper golem statue from a few years back. And if we head into this area, you can see that the forest gets a little bit darker and we can start seeing a bunch of these pale hanging moss that I like using because they look like spider webs. If we continue down this path, it's going to take us back up towards the spawn where we started, but I want to take us further south to see what's new in Savville. So if we fly up once more, we can head on over toward that tower, and this is the Rosewood port. This is a little bit of a ruined area that has only recently become ruined, so a lot of the wood and a lot of the wattle and daub structures are still in place. They're just starting to look a little bit worse for wear. Some of the wooden boards are falling through the floor, and so on. Not much has changed here, except that I have expanded a little bit of the farms. One of the other big things that I've been doing in Tretogor is trying to include a lot more farms, as I've become increasingly aware of how much food people really need. If we continue though, we can see the beauty that is Savville. So we are here on the map. Savville is really my version of a sort of fantasy France. This is the older town itself, and then here we have some farms that I made about a year ago, and the really big new thing is this area. But in any case, I will give a very brief overview of Savville. So this is inspired by Mont Saint-Michel in France. Instead of having a big castle, the idea was that it would have a big abbey or cathedral at the center of the town itself. It is definitely one of the nicer, I would say swankier places in Tretogor. It's probably where I would most want to live because it really has a lot of nice colors and cute little shops. If we come down here, you can see that there is a little barber surgeon. We have a cake shop. Over here is a tavern and there is a bookstore. This is also one of only 2 art galleries in all of Tretogor. Stoneheart really has a really nice cutesy look, although not much has actually changed in this place since the last world tour. So I'm not going to dive into any of the interiors and stuff. Mostly what I want to show off is the manor. So this is Dulac Manor. I'm trying to balance how easily pronounceable the names are in French and English because I want this place to feel French but not be hard to pronounce. We can come through this big vineyard area and we finally have an explanation for where Tretogor gets all of its wine from. So we can go through rows and rows of vineyards. These are really simple designs. It is jungle leaves with mangrove fences, and every once in a while I just replaced a couple of them with bits of jungle just to make it look a bit older. One of the most striking things about this area are the big yellow trees. So I created these trees a while ago and I had nowhere really to put them. And then I realized that the bright yellow would contrast really nicely with the kind of dark purpley roofs here. And we're already going for a sort of fantasy vibe. So I figured in for a penny, in for a pound. This is going to be a sort of really cutesy fairy tale fantasy place in Tretogor. Over on this side though, we have the actual winery. So over here, we have the area where we are pressing our grapes into white and red wine. We have the storage area. So here you can see there's been a bit of a wine spill, and this is where we're storing our wine barrels and stuff. If we come down here, you can see it gets pretty dark, but this is the sort of long-term storage where we're aging our wines. And coming back out, we can pop into this little area over here. We have a small stables where there is a cat. A little bit of a living area. So here we just have a little tub of water and some old pots and stuff, a couple of toilets, because this is where the people actually live who run the winery. So in here we have a pretty rustic communal living area. And if we go up these wonky stairs, this is where these servants slash workers actually live. And then coming back down here, we can also pop briefly into this storage room. And this is where they're storing most of the ingredients and stuff for the wine. Leaving the building, we can finally take a tour of the first real big castle that I've added to Tretogor since the last update. You can see there is a small moat that runs around the castle, and it follows a pretty simple sort of house design. So I really like this place because it's sort of halfway between a big fancy house and a big fancy castle, and it really strikes a nice balance in my opinion. To come around here, we can see we have a couple of little extraneous buildings. So this is where the doves are. This is our little dovecot. And over here, this is our kitchen for the building. Coming into here, we can see where the big metal spiral staircase is, and this is our dining hall. And I can't wait until the new update comes out because I have some really cool ideas for how we can incorporate the new shelf blocks into furniture designs. If we come over here, we can see that there is the entrance area for the home, and over here is our big salon. One of the coolest things about Tretogor to me is the fact that every region sort of has its own distinct vibe and feel, and sometimes even that little bit of a sense of their own time period. So this house is supposed to be kind of like 17th, 18th century, and it really fits with the Savville area being a little bit more nice and modern than some other parts of Tretogor. And over here we have the big master bedroom, and upstairs we have a couple of servants' rooms plus this workout gym, which is the only gym in Tretogor. So if you're trying to get a workout, come to the Dulac Manor. If we fly up through the roof though, and come out of this place, we can see in the distance that there is something big and red sticking out of the forest. And this is the Tretogor Gate. So between Whitehead Bluff and the Tretogor Gate, you can really see that one of the themes of this update is scale. This is the biggest single structure in Tretogor. It is absolutely massive, and if we fly up and around here, you can see it is made out of mostly wood. Technically, it's made out of stripped and crimson wood, plus a bunch of other little miscellaneous things. But the idea is that it looks like red stone. And up top here, you can see it is totally covered in foliage. This is another one of those areas that I have kind of left open for whatever I want to do with it. So yeah, if you are in southern Tretogor, come check out the single biggest structure in the world. Just ahead of us though, you will see that we have some other really big areas of terraformed terrain. This wouldn't be a world tour video if I didn't show you some of the biggest and best things. So if we follow this new little path that runs through the forest here, we can go through these big old tall trees. This is the tall trees area, and up around and get to this little covered bridge. And taking this little covered bridge around, we can get to the biggest city in Tretogor. This is glorious Regensburg. It is the beating heart of Tretogor. It is the center of industry. You can see that we have our factories here. We have tons of little farms and stuff all around. This is one of the only towns that really has suburbs. And you can see that it really is massive compared to a place like Savville or Newport, which I showed off earlier in this video. And of course, every single interior in all of Tretogor is done, unless I forgot like one or two. But for the most part, every place is done. Every place has something interesting going on and unique. Regensburg especially has some of my favorite interiors. And there are so many wonderful places to visit, like the hospital, the factories, the university, all of the rich houses in town. We also have a big spooky mansion. And one of the big new updates to Tretogor is this mountain range and spruce forest. So previously this was just a sort of flat taiga biome with no trees, and now we have this big, beautiful dark forest and these little mountains. They really help frame the spooky mansion nicely, and they also act as a great barrier between the Regensburg area and the Castle Stoneheart area. And for those of you who have been around the block before, you can tell that this area is really changed. We have done a ton of custom terraforming work, getting in some beautiful basalt cliffs. We also have this big new fancy bridge here. And up top, we have another one of the new additions to Tretogor, which is the Sleeping Bear Inn. If I come in for a closer look here, you can see that this place is basically entirely made up out of banners. And this is one of those places where I was again going for a really weird fantasy vibe, sort of coasting off the fact that we are close to the Tretor Gate. I wanted to go for something that just feels weird. So we have our orange walls, we have purple doors and furniture, and we have some yellow wattle and daub. I come inside here, you can see that we have a busy, eclectic kitchen. We have a general sort of tavern area here. And if we come upstairs here, following this glowing arrow, we can get to all the different rooms. So there is a Stoneheart room, a Regensburg room. And if I come around the corner here, we also have a Brewerstown room and a Borovica room. So if we leave the Sleeping Bear Inn and we look across the bay here, we can see that there are some new buildings and new terrain over here. If we follow this little strip of land, we can go across the bluegrass plain and end up around Chamberlain Castle. So Chamberlain Castle is a really small sort of classic medieval location. One of the things that bothered me with Tretogor in the past couple years is that it isn't really medieval in a lot of ways. So here's my attempt to do something that truly feels properly medieval. We have a couple of little medieval farmhouses. We have a stud farm for raising horses. We even have some little cow pastures here. We have a plum orchard. And of course, we have to have our wheat fields. Coming into the village itself, we're going for plastered wooden logs, along with rough cobblestones. So a lot of the houses follow the similar format. We have a little sort of raised area for cooking, a small trestle table for eating, and we have a big old pantry and some sleeping areas, mostly upstairs. I really like how this place turned out, especially the main tower. And of course, one of the cutest little details is we have a broom. So in the western expansion of Tretogor, including this place and a couple of other castles, you can really see that there are a lot of display entities. I'm not totally sure if I'm going to keep building with display entities in the future, but for the time being, they are a really cool way to try and explore different techniques for interior decor in Minecraft. In any case, coming up to here, we have a small sort of tower house inspired by Kingdom Come Deliverance. In any case, we can go through this little wooden gatehouse and up this slope here. You can see this area is kind of sparsely used, so we have a small wooden stable here and a couple of archery targets. We have a little granary here for the people in the village to have their grain be somewhere more secure. And over here we have a little midden heap that is just filled with bits of garbage and waste. Mostly though, this wooden palisade around here just serves to protect the hill from people who are trying to come up and attack the castle. So it's basically just a defensive thing, and it doesn't really enclose anything that important other than the castle itself. Of course, the castle is pretty small. We come in here, we can get into the main room. Over there you can see Brewerstown in the distance. We have a small basement that is split in half between this dark cellar and this cooking area. And if we go upstairs, we can come back to the main room, and up here is the Lord's bedroom. I say Lord, but this area is called Chamberlain Castle because I imagine that it is not owned by a member of the nobility, but by somebody who works for the nobility, and has been gifted this kind of estate as part of a privilege, but also part of a duty to protect the Lord's lands. Here we have a big fancy bed and another little bed design that I really love, and I want to use this more often. And if we come upstairs, we have the attic, which is full of these big wooden beams and areas for the servants to sleep. Of course, one of the display entity details here is that we have made little wooden arrow slits using fake versions of spruce trapdoors. This is another area where we have effectively hit the southern borders of Tretogor, and if we come around here, we can continue going in our clockwise direction to visit Hrad Borovica. So we are currently here on the map, and this is the big siege castle. So this is another area where I was trying to work with custom terrain and custom trees and stuff. And the feeling that I really wanted to elicit with this forest is isolation, basically. So that is why I went for a lot of big, tall, bushy trees. You can still sort of see through the forest, but the real purpose of doing this area was to separate it and create some distance with Brewerstown. So the way you're really supposed to approach it is to come through this narrow little forested valley here and start to see the castle as it opens up to you and the forest recedes in the background. Of course, Borovica is under siege. So coming up to here, we can see that there are some little siege tents, and even one of the houses has been claimed by the besiegers. Over here, we have a cute little chapel for the townsfolk that is currently not in use, of course. And you can see here too that we are using those banner patterns. If we come down here, we can see that there are some more tents, and that's because the people have come by sea to siege this castle. So they are trying to protect the port from other besiegers. Over here, you can see some areas where they have burnt down part of the farmhouses and part of the farms themselves. And this is the center of the siege. So this is an old blacksmith's house that if we come inside here, you can see has been taken over by the besiegers. If we come around though, we can get to where the center of the action has been happening. So here we see some burnt down areas where they've been trying to clear out fences and tall grass. And you can also see that there are arrows and bits of shields and blood all over the floor. And there is even a little sword that has sunk down into the mud in this little moat. This is actually a really well defended castle for the most part. If it wasn't so close to the sea, it would definitely be one of the safest places in Tretogor. And if we come down, we can see that we have also some tents in here where we let in some of the townsfolk before the siege broke out properly. So we did have a little bit of warning when we saw people coming on the horizon, and that is because of our lighthouse. Over here, you can see a training arena that hasn't been used for a while because people have bigger concerns at the moment. And we have a stables here that is mostly empty and also pretty empty of hay because we're running low on supplies at the moment. You can see we're even growing food in barrels here. If we come into the castle itself, there's actually a separation between the lower layer and the upper layers. So the lower layer basically just belongs to the kitchen and some servants. If we come up here, we can get to another little separated area. So this is basically just used for day-to-day living. Here we have a small feasting area, and this connects to a large bathroom. So the actual bath and then the toilet here. You can see the Lord is reading some scrolls on the toilet because we all deserve a toilet scroll from time to time. If we actually come out into this door though, this is how we get to the upper level. You can see this castle is really well thought out in terms of its defense, and that is why this is a siege castle and not a castle that is already burnt down to the ground. Basically because they are generally pretty well defended. In any case though, because I've been kind of teasing it for a little bit, why don't we take a good proper look at Brewerstown. So a little bit of a reminder, we are currently here on the map, and we are entering Brewerstown from the back right now. So here you can see this area is a little bit empty. We have a paddock full of sheep with a little shepherd there. We have an old quarry that's not really being used too much. And if we come down to this area, we can actually see that there are some caves underneath part of Brewerstown. And just through the stalagmites and stalactites, you might be able to spot a little bit of a shrine. Brewerstown is really a big build, and it is a beauty, in my opinion. You can see here that we have a small dock area, we have a bathhouse, and these are the kind of suburbs of Brewerstown. Part of it is an area like this for a sort of small town farmers and people with very simple professions. So that guy over there is a candle maker. And part of it is this kind of open farmland area. And all of this is protected by the sort of ditch and stake system. So we have a big sort of earthen mound here. And then in here we have a ditch filled with wooden stakes. It's not super well defended, but it gets the job done at basically separating these guys from the Stoneheart people. If we come into here though, we can get a better look at what the actual feel is on the ground floor in Brewerstown. A lot of this is just dirt roads, very simple buildings with sort of cobblestone walls. A lot of animal barns, and in Brewerstown especially, I really tried to focus on those kind of secondary buildings that we don't tend to think about too much. Areas where people don't eat or sleep or necessarily live, but areas that are really important to human habitation in general. Over here, you can see that we even have a little stable. And this wraps around the castle and town itself to another little port here that's on the sea, and to the first custom forest that I really did in Tretogor. So for those of you who like custom trees, custom forests, and custom terrain, this big Tretogor update is really for you guys. We also have a ton of other cool stuff around here. For instance, for people who like medieval buildings, we have a ton of great medieval buildings in the town itself. We have a barrel maker. Here you can see a little storefront in the front half of the shop. In the back half of the shop, we have living areas. And if we come up here, we can see that we have a sleeping area that is divided between an area for the children and an area for the adults and a smaller child. If we come out here, we can see the actual workshop for the barrel maker. This is because Brewerstown has a big brewing industry. So this whole sort of bottom half of the town is all correlated. Here we have a tavern, we have a barrel maker, we have the brewery, and then over here we have the hops that they're going to be using to brew the beer. If we come through the town itself, a lot of these buildings follow a similar sort of plan where we have some sort of profession out front in the shop, like this guy, the glassmaker, and then behind them they will have a living area. Up top here we have a bit of a market, and you can see over there is a small cemetery. This is right outside of the church. So we have a sort of Romanesque style church here with a lot of colors on the inside. I wanted this place to feel really bright and poppy. We have a bit of an area for the rich people and an area for the choir back here. And we have a little side altar and a main altar and one behind. Over time, my builds are getting more realistic. So one thing that I would change about this place is I'd probably change out the pews and just leave it as a standing area. We can come up to the castle here. This is following a kind of Anglo-Norman Motte and Bailey castle style. So here we can see a classic Norman keep, and over here we have the sort of Bailey at the bottom and then the Motte for the castle. I'm really happy with how this place turned out, even though the scale is a little bit wonky. I do think it is a little bit big for what it is supposed to be. But in any case, if we come down here, we can get to the main level of the castle, which is mostly used for administrative stuff. We can go down below, which is mainly used for food preparation. So here we have a receiving area for goods coming up through the castle. We also have a small pantry / storage area. If we come over here, we have a kitchen that has an area for cooking meat and for baking bread. There is meat storage over there. And then over here, we have our granary. And this connects out through this little side door to the stables. So we do have another little stables up here for the castle itself. If we fly up past the main floor, we can get to the living chambers of the Lord and Lady of Brewerstown as well as their kid. And over here we have the actual sort of day-to-day living area, the solar. And the last part of this floor really is this place where the servants live and sleep. On every level of the castle, this tower is used for a toilet. So you can see it goes through here, here, and then dumps down at the bottom where it can be emptied out by the exterior. And the other towers, that one is used for a staircase that winds up and down. That one is just used for miscellaneous rooms, and so is that one. So if we come up to this level, you can see that the miscellaneous room is actually a treasury. And across the way here, on this side, it's being used as a little bit of a bath. On the other hand, going one level up, we can see that it's just being used for servant sleeping areas. So this is the big fancy area for the lord and lady to receive people. If we get a better view of it from this angle, you can see that we have dual thrones here. We have a big sort of long trestle table set up for counselors and advisors to be advising the lord. We have a little area here by the fire with a couple of little doggies and some seating by the windows. And then over here we have somebody playing the harp. And lastly, if we fly up, we can get to the top of the castle itself. So this is actually the build that I started with when I expanded Tretogor for this latest update. I started this build in early January and I finished sometime around middle of April, I believe. And that's largely because I started taking on a bunch of side projects, including designing about a bajillion trees. In any case, if we continue going along here, I do want to pop in very briefly to see Castle Stoneheart. So this was for a long time the biggest castle in Tretogor and certainly the loneliest. It is on this big rocky outcrop. Of course, this stuff didn't used to be here and neither did that, so this was really the edge of the world. In fact, this was one of the earliest parts of Tretogor that I built, and I spent a long time trying to fill up the road between this place and the spawn point. So we are here on the map, and you can see we have a little bit of a simple castle town, a couple of towers leading up here. These are mostly defensive, but they also do have rooms for people to be living, soldiers basically. And then over here we have a big iron throne. If we come over to this part of the castle, you can see that we have a big receiving area, and I'm emphasizing the bigness of it because at the time this really was a really huge castle for me. And I suppose it still is. I think it is the second biggest castle in Tretogor behind only Castle Leslie. In any case though, some of the things that I decided to try and fill up the area with in between Castle Stoneheart and the rest of Tretogor is this little farming village called Dewberry. So Dewberry started in lore and also in real life as just a little inn. Specifically, this building here is a replica of the tavern at the beginning of The Witcher 3. And I decided the things that would probably spring up around an inn might be some simple sort of peasant farmers. So I came in here and I did a couple of basic farms, and then recently I came in and realized I don't have anywhere near enough farms, so I started adding some more. If we follow this road up here, we can follow this little very inconspicuous path, and this is going to lead us for a while through the woods until we eventually get to a little ruined wooden fort called Fort Mustin. This was inspired by Red Dead Redemption 2. This also gets back to the question of what time period does Tretogor take place in, and of course the answer is all the time and none of the time. So Fort Mustin is really a 19th century fort, kind of US Civil War era, and it fits with a couple of other builds around here, but obviously not with all of the builds in Tretogor. I really do like this place. I love the kind of run-down wooden aesthetic. I think it's such a refreshing change of pace to see wooden ruins instead of stone ruins sometimes. And of course, we are also adding in a bit of lore to the world because we have a big red and gold banner here. And if we look in the basement of this tower, we can see an old black and gold banner. So these are two of the warring factions in Tretogor. We can again follow a little path here, and this will take us all the way to Whaler's Wharf. So this is the last of the big additions to Tretogor. This is a little North Atlantic fishing village, and it's really inspired a lot by a couple of different things like Eastern Quebec and Newfoundland and Maine, as well as taking a little bit of inspiration from Norway. And of course, taking inspiration from a ton of miscellaneous things as well, music videos, video games, TV shows, all that stuff. This is another place where I really spent a lot of time working on the organics. So just below me, you can see that we have a whale in the water. This is a little blue whale, and this is because we're in the whaler's wharf. I will put up a map now, but I love the whales that I did for this place. Unfortunately, they are being hunted, so it is a bit of a give and take, I guess. Around here, we also have things like a flock of seagulls and little bits of crabs around. On the bottom of this ship here, we have barnacles. We have a flock of birds, of course, leaving the clock tower. And if you count them, we also have a bunch of organic trees around here too, really adding to this really spooky sort of effect because we have a lot of these really sharp, jaggedy looking trees. They're also really dark and they're really close to the village. And of course, over here, we have a little dead hanging fish. I love the way this place turned out because it has such a strong sense of feeling. I feel like it's one of those places that you go to in Tretogor and you just immediately understand what the vibe is because it's kind of dark and creepy and you have no idea what's going to happen if you choose to stay the night. That being said, though, I do recommend stopping off for a hot lobster at Ralph's, the only restaurant in town. A lot of the interiors for this place are pretty basic. They tend to have something like a little bed, a pot-bellied stove, and some sort of little idea of how the family here is living. This is one of the darker ones because when you come in here, you can immediately see that there is a big barrel on the table with 7 cups around. We have a nice little bed here, but then up top, we just have a little bed with undyed wool and a single beet on a plate. So I imagine that this might be the house of somebody who's alcoholic and probably doesn't treat their kid very well. Not all the houses in this place have that kind of theming going on. A lot of them have, sort of different vibes. So over here, we can see a big moose head because this is one of the richer places. Obviously, it's not like super rich, but we also have here a classic sort of yellow raincoat, as I love the idea of the Whalers Wharf people wearing like those big waxy yellow raincoats from back in the day. And over here on the edge of town, we have a little run-down building. The last thing is we have a bunch of ships again in the water, and over here we have a big, really nice ship that took me a few hours. This is a merchant schooner, and I really like the way it turned out. Over here, we can get to the fabled Castle Leslie. Now, one of the new things that I've done in here is add a few buildings. Castle Leslie used to just face off into the woods, and that always kind of bothered me because it didn't make sense. So now Castle Leslie has some more people living around it that kind of fill out the sense of the world. Over here, we have a captain. So this is Captain S. Bellman. And if we come inside here, we can get a little bit of storytelling. You can see that this guy is away at sea because none of the candles are lit, there is no food on the table, and the fireplace isn't on. Of course, if we come out here, we can get to some of the other buildings. So this one here is just a kind of generic storage for the docks, although we do have a lot of coal here because we're pretty close to a coal mine. And that is one of the big exports of the area. And then up here, we have a sail repair shop. So you can see in here that we are trimming up some sails for people who have had theirs ruined by a storm. And then the last building over here is just a little farmhouse with a wheat field. This doesn't really ruin the view of Castle Leslie, although I did put it off for a long time because I was worried that it might. But ultimately, I don't think having the wheat field distracts from the view, and I think it adds a lot to the sense of realism in the world. It feels more realistic and more sort of logical that somebody would actually live here and spend their time here. If we follow this little road, we can get to Treor Mine. You can see over there is Rostillid and over there is Somerton. Not a lot has changed around here, although we do have a bunch of new custom trees. And Somerton is the big sort of farming area of the world. Up top here, we have Dunline Castle, which is just a really small tucked away place past this little sort of sleepy village. We have this old ruined looking sort of mossy castle. And this is another place that I feel really benefits from the custom trees. This is, of course, a custom tree, and we have just a couple around here and there. And this effectively brings us back to Medina. So we did skip over one or two things in the middle of Tretogor. One of them, of course, being Marsh Castle. So this is the oldest build in Tretogor. This is the reason that I started my world. It was the very, very first thing I built. And it still holds up. It still has a special place in my heart. And just by it over in the distance, we can see Newport. So this is where we spawned. And we first took this road up to go north. Over here, you can see another new addition. So that is a little bit of a citrus orchard that I planted over there. And if we come over here, we can see that Newport now has a bunch of custom birch trees. So I do like the way that this place has turned out, and Minecraft leaves can also be a little bit more transparent than I would like sometimes. But overall, I do like the effect. Newport is looking better than ever. Sort of like Castle Leslie, this place used to just have forest right up into the gates, and now it really feels like a lived-in area. We even came in and added these two new sort of farming areas in the latest update. This one was built on stream, and it is a flower farm. And this is a common pasture, so this is for the farmers in the area or the people who live in Newport to graze their animals. And of course, we can come into the city itself, and this is the capital of Tretogor province. It is organized around this central square here with a poor area on the side, a couple of warehouses leading to docks. We have a bit of a richer area with the town's church based off of a sort of small Byzantine chapel, basically. And if we come down this road here, we can get to the throne of the Lord of Newport. We can also go past very briefly the headquarters of the Great Merchants Guild, which shows up in a lot of places in Tretogor if you guys get the world download. And here is the throne room. This is a relatively small castle. There isn't a ton going on, but I do like it overall. It has sort of a gothic look in a way. And I still have a place in my heart for Newport, along with every build in this world. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget that the world download is in the description. As always, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see me do more of this stuff in the future. I have no idea what the next video is going to be, but it probably won't be in Tretogor. And I will see you guys next time.